All right, we are live, I believe. Hey, Lisa, we're emailing today. 2 minutes if you're on replay and you're wanting to skip ahead, you can skip ahead 2 minutes. We're being very serious now, Patricia and I. No silliness at all. See, Lisa's probably judging my Spanish accent when I say Patricia. Patricia. She's like, I should teach you Spanish. So, Australiano. I'm trying to learn how to say that properly.
Australiano.
Australiano, because I apparently go like che Australiano. I'm like Australiano.
That's good. Sounds good enough.
Oh. All right, where are people today anyway? Is any people that are going, what the hell is going on? Are you judging me trying to speak one word in Spanish? Where are you tuning in from? I imagine there's, like, I see someone here called, no, I won't read out names because that's like, I don't have permission to read out names. Okay, I won't do that. But where are you in the world? I imagine mainly North Americans, I guess. Yeah, Vancouver, Canada. Obviously,
Italy.
Okay.
We love Italy here. Here. In my little space.
There. That's right. Italy's fun. I spent last August in Italy, in Sicily, which is sort of Italy because it's part of Italy, but it's sort of different as well.
Sicilia.
Si. Colombia, connecting from Argentina. Nice.
Hola. Hey, everyone.
Yeah, we're about to start. I should get my thing up. We're doing German scheduling today. We've got 11 seconds left until we start.
Thank you, Steve.
We're un-Germaning. Patricia went on an un-Germaning journey.
Right. The un-Germaning journey for the Mexican.
All right, let's start this stuff before it gets too silly. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. This is a great session because I've got Patricia here, and we're doing a session on how forgotten trauma shows up today. So I hope you know Patricia. If not, she's a therapist, she's a yoga teacher, she's a lot of things actually. But in terms of the actual stuff, she's meditated for a few decades, done all sorts of stuff with Eastern philosophies for a couple of decades, integrating into trauma-sensitive methods like transactional analysis, systemic therapy, emotionally focused therapy. She's a specialist in developmental trauma as well, and a yogi that everyone wants to be. She's also just a really cool person. She speaks many languages. She goes in all sorts of like range of like fun and serious and caring and all this. So I think you love her if you haven't met her yet. The stuff that I should be saying is take care of yourself during this session, of course. If at any time you feel a bit agitated or spaced out or tense or something, get up, move, breathe, go for a walk in nature, talk to some loved ones, pat your dog. You can also pat a cat, but dogs are better. Anything like that to take care of yourself, and ask, is it kind to be here for you right now? If you've been binge watching sessions, maybe skip this one and watch them replay. Or if you're going through a tough time, maybe therapy would serve you better rather than this, which is educational. Of course, it may just be good fun to be here and you may learn a lot as well, but just take care of yourself as you can. A few little things as well. Please do share this session. I've said a lot of times, but we want everyone to benefit from it. They're very targeted sessions as well, a lot of them. So if one of the titles stands out as someone you know, please do send that to them. Or if just the whole event, you're loving it, share it with everyone on social media or share it to WhatsApp groups or however else the kids share things these days. I don't know, I'm not up with the latest lingo. And also, if you want to learn more, if you love some of the stuff that's been going on here and the framing around healing and then growing your superpowers and post-traumatic growth, you can also check out the course. There's Ilan's healing one. I was just listening to that in the park. I was listening to the modules of Ilan teaching and it's great. So please do check that out if you're interested. I'll pop some links in the chat. Otherwise, I think I've gone through all the stuff and I'll hand it over to Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Would you mind typing in the chat if you're coming here firsthand as a personal exploration, or if this is something that you mostly or are mainly interested in doing this for your own, for work. So like as a coach or as a facilitator. So that will help me set up a little bit of the language, although I will cater for both, of course. Great, good to hear both interests. Wonderful. Yes, that's definitely our way to do it within the Embodiment Unlimited family. We base our approaches into working with others through an embodied experience, and that means doing your own personal work. So it goes hand in hand. So I'm glad to see lots of answers around that. Great, wonderful. Okay, so I'm taking a deep breath to tune into just a bit more, because this is one of the topics that I love about, that I spend a lot of my time talking about in workshops and stuff like that. So I'm gonna try to frame it into less than 30 minutes. I will do my best. Okay, so the title for this session is The Things We Forgot About Trauma and How It Affects Us, or how forgotten trauma is affecting our lives. So I would love to hear what comes up for you when you hear this title. One word or two words. What comes up when you hear the title? What forgotten trauma looks like, or how it shows up in our lives. I see reference to reactivity, pre-verbal trauma, emotional, yeah. Anger. Yeah, so there's a very wide scope of things that we could cover when we speak of that forgotten trauma. So the first thing that I would start off doing is inviting you to take a breath and saying, even if I want to uncover this stuff, even if I want to walk through the trauma responses or through the adventure of whatever the trauma journey is or will be for me, I have a choice to say how much and when. So taking a deep breath and touching base with our ability to choose and to have agencies over ourselves. Sometimes when we think about trauma, it's already like this huge thing that's usually buried in the closet that never gets opened. But it's also, it comes with a sensation that when I open that closet, what does usually happen when you open that closet? It comes crashing down big time. And that's the sensation with trauma. It's not usually what it occurs, not necessarily. Particularly if we're doing it with someone who knows what they're doing, we know that one of the key things in dealing with trauma is being able to find the perfect dosage of how much we can process at a time. So in my first invitation is creating this first structure around, you can choose when to stop and how much to take in of whatever comes through. This is not a session where we're gonna uncover all of the hidden stuff that's buried. It's not about that, but definitely just listening about it might set your mind wandering or your body wandering through some places. So there are several ways how we can explore this issue of forgotten trauma. One way to see it is, yes, there is trauma in the bigger responses, being angry at everyone all the time, even if I don't remember why that happened or how do I connect that to my history of trauma. But there's also the small responses, the small things that we do that we don't even recognize as trauma. Like, for example, being very anxious about someone being late. It shows up as constantly in a regular life, and we think it has nothing to do with us. but maybe there is something that connects us to a trauma in the past. There are other two ways of looking at this issue of hidden trauma. And that is trauma that belongs to us. Like, oh, yes, I know that my father was in a severe accident. This is a made-up example. And he did not come home or didn't pick me up at school because he was in this accident. And then I have an issue around my partner coming in late or when he doesn't arrive after work late. So I have a relatively clear link because it's something that happened in my life. And usually these types of events are pretty clear in our memories. But there are some issues that are not as clear in our memories because they were other types of events, like I referred to yesterday, to emotional abuse. And this emotional abuse, as opposed to this event of like an accident, that's like a big drop of a lot of things in 1 second. Emotional abuse tends to be like a tiny drop of water. But you guys know this example, right? A tiny drop of water for a long period of time can create as big a hole as something that just drops in 1 second, right? That's how canyons are formed in the world. So that's another way that we might not be able to point out how several symptoms in my life are related to trauma. And then there's another one that's incredibly interesting and, in my experience, very beautiful to explore, which is generational trauma. So this issue around being late or around the fear and anxiety when someone is coming in late might not necessarily be related to something that I lived through in my lifespan, but actually happened because, for example, the grandmother had this experience where the grandfather died in an accident when he was about to get home. And these types of stuff are also inherited. So of course, it will not make sense if we explore it as a sense of something that happened in our lifetime, because sometimes we don't even know the story of the grandmother, and that's already trickled down into our responses. Yeah. How is this landing? Good. Okay. So I'm going to stop a little bit in this generational trauma, which is much more common that we give it credit for. So there are several responses that are related to generational trauma. And for example, one of them is very common to find the grandmother who was physically abused in her marriage. And then the second generation, that mother would be maybe not physically abused, but in an abusive relationship as well. And the granddaughter in this example, she would be not necessarily repeating the pattern, which those are relatively easy to link, right? So people who say, I find myself in abusive relationship, just like my mother did, that's a relatively easy link. But sometimes what happens with this third generation is that what they do is I break it off even before things start. I dismiss the person that I meet when I find the smallest of the flaws. And that's enough to break up the entire process of dating. Another one of how this shows up is the person, that third generation person, will find themselves in what we call the unavailable relationships. Unavailable relationships is, for example, a guy who's married. Why is this a trauma response? Why is that related to the violence that the grandmother experienced? Because unavailable partners keep us safe, because they never get close enough, right? So it sounds, and the person might not even be aware, of course. That's why we're referencing this as hidden trauma. But what this person sees is, oh, for some reason, I cannot find the right person. Or for some reason, all of the guys that I meet are married. But there is installed such a big trauma response. And again, trauma response in this sense means survival. So that it was so dangerous for grandmother that this daughter would not risk being in a relationship because it could represent that danger of violence. Make sense? And this has nothing to do with knowing the story. And sometimes, yes, we have these grandmothers, like one of my grandmothers, she was like, men are like this and men do like this. So they tell you the story that you're supposed to believe, right? But sometimes we don't have contact with the stories of those other grandmothers, right? So I received like a lot of these direct stories and life conclusions, right, from my maternal grandmother, but I heard nothing from my paternal grandmother until very later on in my life. I heard that when my father was born, she was like, another man. Men are always so harmful, like, So when I hear this story, I recognize the story that lies in my lineage about whatever stories happened to my grandmother, even though she passed away already. And I don't know what could have gotten her to that degree of believing there should not be any more men alive, because that's what she thought when my father was born. And that's big stuff. Yeah. So even we can know the stories or we can not know the stories, and that's still something that's passed. We see that this is passed on and somehow lived through other generations. Not everyone will live this, but certain people will. And this takes me to one thing that I always like to say whenever I'm discussing this topic of the hidden trauma things, of the forgotten trauma, is that I would definitely invite people not to worry, like, did this happen in my lineage? Might this have happened in my life? And maybe I don't remember. I would say, don't look at it that way. I would say, or the invitation that I always say is, let's go for what you need in your life right now. And that's the thing, because if we want to go and arrange and clean up everything that's behind, we would not finish, right? It's like the kitchen cleaning. It's never done completely. And that's not the point in life anyways, right? The point is to actually be present in our lives and start moving forward in those areas that we want to. So whenever we see that movement forward, and I see that I don't find that freedom into relationships, into money, into work, into fulfillment, into health, then I see what might be in the path of those things, but not the other way around. Make sense? I have actually encountered some people that are constantly looking for, oh, I want to work this trauma that my grandmother experienced, and also this happened to my grandmother's mother and then aunt, and it's people who usually, when this is like a little tending towards the obsessive side, these are usually people who are not engaging in their own lives. So their energy is turning backward and looking for things to do in the back, right? In the past. But it's really, to a certain extent, pointless to do the work backwards without having, I wouldn't say necessarily a goal, but when our gaze is forward. Yeah. We might be doing the same type of work, but it's really different when we are placing ourselves forward into life. So what are other things that show up from generational stuff that we don't usually know? That's why I picked this generational thing to focus on, because it's usually the forgotten or the hidden trauma. I have seen situations where it's as simple in our everyday life as I can do a diet, right? So like I want to lose weight and I want to cut off, let's say, bread or the classical things. And it's a very interesting process when we go into finding that family several generations ago was involved in a situation of either deep poverty or famine. So bread meant, and usually it's bread that takes this kind of generational charge, because bread was something that was relatively accessible even in really poor families. So bread was like sustenance, and you would cling to it. And in situations of famine or poverty, it doesn't matter if it's going to make you fat. It doesn't matter if it's going to add a role here or there. It's going to keep you alive. And when situations go as deep as life risk, as poverty or famine, that's when they take so much hold within the generational lineage. And of course, for a descendant of this family, dropping bread would mean the risk of losing life. Even if we don't know the story, it can represent so much. That's why when we deal with trauma, behavioral changes are very difficult to address just as a behavior. As just stop eating the bread, just start doing exercise, just do this, doesn't make sense when we're dealing with trauma. This also shows up as, I do the therapy, I do the work, but there is still something lingering that's still in the body that has to do with trauma. And it doesn't usually break just by saying, this is stupid, I should be making smarter decisions, which is usually how we hold ourselves up in these types of things. And if I see that I cannot, how can I not eat bread? But when you see that it's connected to a survival instinct, then it makes sense. And then you're not as stupid, right? You're actually pretty smart. So that this type of work will help us do what's needed to be done in the generational area so that we are free to then choose. Are we good with this generational aspect of what's hidden? Super interesting. To me, it's one of the things that I do the most, delve into generational. But it's incredibly interesting how these things show up. So another way, and I'm going to go into now into the sphere, not of the generational, but on the things that we have actually lived. I mentioned briefly emotional abuse, right? Not in the sense that sometimes these things can seem as forgotten because they were not as evident. Also, we have a lot of religious influence into thinking you should be grateful for your parents and your parents did your best. And even when that may be true, we sometimes use this language to not see the damage that happened. Because sometimes when we go into our pain and our grief, we tend to think, if I see that I had a painful story in the past, that means that I am ungrateful and that I don't love my parents. And that's far from truth. We can actually hold both realities at once. We are able to do that. Hey, I love my parents, and I also see that I was in deep pain because this happened. And it's really as clear as that. And one of the things that become hidden in this process is being unaware of how unsafe I felt, of how unloved I felt, of how not enough I felt. And it's in the smallest things, not having our parents meet us in the eye, right? These types of things leave deep imprints. Not having parents recognize what I am doing, my work. I usually use the example when, the child comes home and I did my drawing, with crayons and like weird things and just like silly things that we do as kids. But it's my work, even if I'm 4. It's what I can produce. And when it's usually met with denial or neglect, there's this process inside that, that means that I did not do enough, or that I'm not interesting enough, or these types of assumptions that the little child makes. And we make them so constantly that we forget that we're actually doing them, right? Because we recognize them when there's a contrast. So if I always get praised at work, and sometimes and another day they dismiss my work, I will notice, because I'm used to the feedback. But in our childhood, we're not used to whatever mom and dad cannot provide. And that becomes a standard for us. And that's where this goes into the forgotten or the hidden aspect of it. And how does that show up in our adult life? That I can easily place myself in places where I don't feel safe or valued, and that's normal to me. Whether that's romantic relationships, or friendships, or even job situations, because there is no contrast. I do not know what it means to feel loved and appraised. Therefore, it's easy for me to be there. That's the language, right? And the one of the key things for me that makes it forgotten is that we did not receive a dose of the opposite. This is when it's really helpful for some people to have like the grandmother who's from outside of the house and can bring another type of medicine. In shamanic work, they call it medicine, like just from their presence, they bring another element of just being able to be a fun person in a household that's like super strict and rigid. Or a teacher, and these become external resources that help the child either not delve into that trauma or not delve as much. And that's helpful enough. Like it does help at the end of the day. So how is this landing? We covered a wide spectrum, timeline wise, and how these things show up, but how there can be as important as a trauma that we know happened and we know and are very aware of. Yeah. How is this landing? Anyone want to share? Very helpful. My childhood best friend's mother provided that medicine for me. Yes, I'm happy. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that people have these opportunities. It resonates. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of insights about me and some clients. Wonderful. Great. Okay. So we started our session placing this solid place inside of us that said, I am willing to face my trauma work and I'm open and I'm here for it. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to hurt myself, and I can pace my work and I can know when to rest. And we close this session placing a hand somewhere that feels comfortable in our bodies and say, hey, we did it. We kept ourselves safe. We're here. We went through a session of 30 minutes and I feel fine. I survived. I'm here. Yeah, even if things came up, like, good job. Let's recognize that for ourselves with some love, with some warmth. As deep as you can go with this sensation of being there for you for now, that's fine. Wonderful. I thank you everyone for being here, for listening so openly with your hearts. I can feel this. I'm grateful and I hope to see you someday soon. I'm going to be here all week. Thank you, Steve. Back at you.
Yes, Patricia doesn't leave this event. She's still going to be on later today as well. And she does her daily question answer sessions at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, all that. So you can catch a lot more of her. I think so much positive stuff in the chat. And I think you've seen it as well, Patricia. But if anyone else would like to add something that was a takeaway from this session, or something that just gave you a new sort of lease on things or anything, feel free to drop it in the chat or write it for yourself so you have something to hang on to. And of course, check out all of Patricia's sessions coming up as well, or the replays of them. As long as you're taking care of yourself as well, don't just binge watch them all. Just as much as we all just want to watch Patricia all day, she's awesome. So a couple things, as I just said, take care of yourself after each of these sessions. Go for a walk, hang out with good people, all these sorts of things. Eat some good food. Good food's always good and grounding. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself. There's actually going to be a session coming up next on food, actually done by Mark. So that was must have been in my subconscious somewhere. Do share it with your friends as well. As I keep saying, I want people to benefit. So share it with people who this particular session or other sessions or all of them. Just share that link with people so they can sign up and get the emails to get the sessions. If you're interested in courses, there's Elon's course, which is currently available for a super cheap price, because we want it to be accessible to as many people as possible. If you are in the global south or you haven't been working for a long time and truly can't afford it as well, you can email us. That's Agatha's email is on the bottom there. So check it out if you're curious about that course. And it also has a look at post-traumatic growth, developing superpowers, particularly for facilitators, but for everyone if they want to build, like heal from the trauma and actually build and become extraordinary from that as well. So that's what the course is. There's also the replays there. Don't share them with like publicly, but that's the replays for everyone with the all access pass. Ooh. You're meant to say ooh every time I say that in case you haven't seen that. Yeah, there we go. We've got Jeannie doing it properly. So thanks for that. Have I forgotten anything? I've probably forgotten something. But that was just really nice from Patricia there. That's right. I meant to tell you, screen share this thing, aren't I? I'll be here for one more session tonight, Mark's session. So that's the one coming up on trauma and eating. Let me show you. So how to eat what you actually want. And then Patricia's going to be back with a session on anger. She found it funny that she was doing this session, I believe, when we were talking about it. Had some silly name, I think, originally. Um, there's another one with Mark, trauma and pride, about sort of arrogance, like sort of putting up a persona in front. So that might you may know someone who would benefit from that. Obviously, tomorrow a whole heap more coming up. One for men, particularly, because often there's not many men within this field, so it's looking at masculine stuff. Um, Danielle is going to be doing a nice one about burnout as well. There's going to be a panel again around the middle of the day. A whole heap of stuff in German cultural panel if anyone here is German. Obviously Patricia's sessions. There's so much stuff coming up. We were just talking about perfectionism before, weren't we, Patricia? So come along, share it with your friends. That's the main stuff, and we hope you got something from it. Anything you want to say in closing?
Oh no, just very happy to be here.
Be here and never leave. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we may see you in an hour and a half. Wow, that's a big gap between sessions. I swear it's been back to back. So yeah, 11 p.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one until then. Take care of yourselves. Take care of yourself, Patricia, and see you soon.